All right. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm Emily Sides. I am a partner and financial advisor here on the Sides Wealth Advisory Group team. And I'm going to give it just another maybe 30 seconds or so to allow a couple others to join before we get started. So for those of you that are already on the call, thank you for joining. And again, we're going to give it just another 30 seconds or so before we actually kick it off. All right, so let's get started. I want to be conscious of your time. For those of you that have attended our quarterly webinars in the past, you'll know that we cover various financial wellness topics. We're always looking for new topics and ideas, so feel free to shoot us over an email if you do have any ideas for topics in the future. We're always happy to entertain those ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about debt. And good debt and bad debt. We're going to spend a lot of our time talking about credit card debt as well. So today's topic is taking control of your finances. Again, I'm Emily on the Sides Wealth Advisory Group. These are high-level topics. This is going to be about a 15 to 20-minute presentation, and then we always open it up for questions at the end. So if you're new to these, you can email your questions into our group email, which is info at sideswealth.com. So email your questions over while we're going through the presentation, and then when we get to the end, we will open it up for those questions. So again, email your questions to info at sideswealth.com. All right. Here we go. So before I get started, I wanted to start off with a statistic on credit card debt. And you can see the topics we're going to talk about today, but the average US household has somewhere between $6,000 to $7,000 of credit card debt today, and annually is paying about $1,100 in interest on that credit card debt. So if you do some quick math there, that average household is paying over 15% in interest on their credit card debt right now. So pretty high interest that average American is paying. And so the idea today is to kind of analyze your debt and your situation and hopefully give you some tools to better your situation if you do find, as we're going through some of these exercises, that you might not be in the best situation. So our topics today, we're gonna talk about your personal balance sheet, right ways to use debt, spending habits, and budgeting as well towards the end. Okay, so today's session is going to be hopefully a little more interactive. If those of you that are joining this have access to a pen and paper, I am going to be asking some questions that you can write down for yourself personally. So take a moment, grab a pen and paper, and again, you'll be able to write down some information as we go through some of these slides. We are going to be emailing out after this call a worksheet that is going to walk through everything that I'm going to talk about today. So if you don't get a chance to do this as we're going through the webinar, you will get a worksheet that's going to have a lot of information for you that's going to go through step by step all these questions that I'm asking. So let's start with your balance sheet. What I want you to do, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do this, is I first want you to calculate your liquid assets. So I want you to think about rough numbers here, how much you have in your savings and your investment accounts, money that you have access to today. I don't want you to think about your IRAs or your retirement accounts. Those are typically going to cause a penalty if you access those today. So we don't want to factor those in. But I want you to total up your liquid assets, your liquid investments. So come up with a total number there. And I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. And then I'm also going to ask that you calculate how much you think you would need to cover 3 months of living expenses. Rough numbers here again, they don't have to be perfect, but calculate how much you think you would need to cover 3 months of living expenses. Sometimes we refer to that in our world as an emergency fund. So somewhere between 3 to 6 months is recommended that you keep set aside for any unplanned expenses or emergencies. Today, we're going to go with 3 months. And then what you want to do is take that first number, your liquid assets. You're going to subtract those 3 months of living expenses, and you're going to end up with a number at the end. If that number is positive, that is the number that you have available today to work with to pay off those debts that we're going to talk about. If you don't have a positive number at the end, that's okay. What we're going to do is hopefully give you some tools to get yourself in a better place to be able to pay off debt in the future. Okay. The last thing I'm going to have you do before I move on here, I also want you to list down on that piece of paper you have all of your debts. And I want you to start listing those from your highest interest rate debt down to your lowest interest rate debt. Again, just a rough estimate here of your debts, highest to lowest interest rate. And I'll give you all a moment to do that as well. Okay, so I'm going to keep this moving. Let's talk about those debts that you just wrote down. So there are what we would call good debt and bad debt. So let's just spend a moment talking about good debt. Good debt is sometimes what we refer to as installment debt. And some examples of that are listed on the screen right now. So a mortgage, a line of credit, auto financing, student loans. And installment debt is when you're set up with typically a set interest rate and a set schedule to pay that money back over a set period of time. Maybe it's 5 years for that car loan, maybe it's 30 years for that mortgage, but you know, if you make those set monthly payments, you're going to pay enough in principal and in interest to pay that money back over that set period of time. This is good debt. It's useful debt to have. It helps your credit if you're making those monthly payments on time, and it's typically necessary. Most of us do not have money available to pay for a home outright or a car outright. So this debt is typical, it's normal, it's healthy to have. And if you're making those monthly payments, it's good for your credit. It's very normal. And then we have credit card debt, which isn't necessarily good debt or the debt that we like to see people have. So on average right now, if you carry a credit card balance month to month, the average interest rate that you're paying is somewhere between 17 to 18%. I've seen others that are upwards of 20 to 30% as well. So the interest that you're paying on your credit card debt is typically much higher than that other screen we were just looking at, those other debts that we were just talking about. So interest on credit cards are pretty high, and that is not a good thing for us. The other challenge with credit cards is you probably have multiple credit cards out there, and it's harder to keep track of what you're paying, where that money is going, and your outstanding balances. So credit cards can be confusing. They also can come with annual fees as well, and you might not even know you're paying those annual fees. So credit cards tend to be confusing to keep track of. And again, there isn't those set installment payments where we're going to be able to pay that debt off over the course of a year or 2 years, like that debt that we had just talked about. So some things to think about with these credit cards is, can you transfer your balances onto one credit card where you can consolidate your debt? Or can you move your money to a credit card that has lower interest? Maybe you're currently paying 20% interest. Can you shop around and find a credit card that's only going to charge you 8 or 9%? Or there are some cards out there where you might be able to find 0 interest for 12 to 18 months. Also, again, look at those annual fees and see if you can cut back on those too. So some things to think about with these credit cards. So what we're going to think about next with these credit cards is, how to and when to, I'm sorry, hold on one second. I think I missed a screen here. Here we go. So sorry about that. What we're going to look at next is those credit card payments that we could be making versus an installment loan. And what we're seeing on the screen here is an example of a $2,000 outstanding balance on a credit card versus a $2,000 installment loan. The installment loan, let's start by looking at that first at the bottom there. Both of these, you're going to be paying 18% interest, but that installment loan is set up so that you're going to pay it off over the course of 24 months or 2 years. In total, you're going to pay over the course of 24 months, $2,394, again, 18% interest. But those installment payments are going to be even and smoothed out over the course of those 24 months. On credit cards, typically with a credit card, your minimum payment is somewhere around 5% of your balance. So if you're only making the minimum payment that you have to make on those credit cards, it is going to take you 89 months to pay off $2,000, and you're going to pay over $800 in interest. Your total payments are going to be $2,811. It's a little scary to think about if you're only making those minimum credit card payments. 24 months to pay off $2,000 or 89 months to pay off $2,000. That is a significant difference. And imagine if that balance is a little bit bigger. Imagine if your balance is $5,000 or $10,000, how much in interest you could be paying if you're only making those minimum payments. So again, we really want to think about making those installments over time and not paying those minimum balances on our credit cards. So I'm going to have us do a little more work here. So again, grab your pen and paper. And what we're going to look at next is, again, your debt and your situation. We're going to be coming up with a debt to income ratio for yourself. So the first thing we're going to do here on this equation is calculate your monthly debt payments. So take a little bit of time here and total up how much in payments you're making a month on your debt. And for this exercise, I want you to exclude your mortgage. So no mortgage here, but all other debts I want you to total up. And that's going to be the first part of this equation. So I'll give you a moment to think about that and total that up. And then the next part of this, I want you to calculate your after-tax monthly income. After-tax monthly income is going to be the amount you take home, the amount that goes into your bank account after taxes. We refer to that as our net income. So think about your after-tax income and a rough estimate of what that might be. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that total debt payment, divide it by your net income, your after-tax income, and multiply it by 100. And that's going to give us a percentage. And that is your debt to income ratio. So generally for this, a good debt to income ratio is going to be less than 15%. Anything above 20%, we probably need to reevaluate the debts that we have. You have a lot of debt that we want to really work hard on paying off as quickly as possible to get us in a better situation. So again, we want to see this number somewhere less than 15% for ourselves individually. So on top of that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about budgeting today. The worksheet that we're going to send out is going to give you some tools. We've covered budgeting in these quarterly series in the past, where we'll spend a lot more time talking about how to build a budget. But just some things to think about that I think a lot of us already know is you want to look at all of your monthly spending and breaking it down by those fixed expenses that you know aren't going to change versus those variable expenses that you have a lot more control over. Those variable expenses are going to be travel, gifts, entertainment, eating out. I know that has become a really big expense. I like to DoorDash food. That is a very expensive probably unhealthy habit to get into. So look at those variable monthly expenses that you have. That is going to be the easiest place that you can start at looking where you can cut back on your spending in order to work towards paying some of those debts off. All right. All right, let me move on here. So, what we're going to look at next is whether or not it makes sense now to, we've talked about different types of debt, the credit card debt, whether it makes sense to pay off some of this debt now versus saving that money now. And what we're looking at here are two different scenarios. The idea is that we have $1,000 in credit card debt and we have $1,000 in a savings account. And the question is, should we take that $1,000 in our savings account and pay off our credit card immediately? Or should we leave that $1,000 in our savings account and let it stay there and let it grow and be invested? So on the left-hand side, you'll see that the credit card is charging 18% interest. So if we carry that $1,000 balance for a year, the interest that we would pay on that credit card is $180. The savings account, it's in likely something very safe. We're going to assume that you're going to earn 1.25% on that money. So you're going to earn $12.50 on that money over the course of a year. You're pretty clearly in this scenario paying much more in interest than you are earning on that savings account, and you're going to end up with a net negative number at the end of the year, paying much more in interest, $167.50. If we paid off that credit card balance immediately, we would end up with a net zero number. So this is a simple example of where it makes sense to use our savings immediately to pay off debt. The opposite could happen. So we get asked often, I don't like carrying my mortgage and I want to pay it off as quickly as possible. But if you have a low mortgage interest rate, let's say your mortgage interest rate is 3 or 4%, you have money that's in a savings account, maybe it's in a CD and it's earning 4.5%. If you were to do these numbers, your savings account would earn more in interest than the interest you're paying on your debt, likely, depending on the balances, but likely you would. And therefore, we would want to keep that money invested. We would want to keep it in the savings account versus paying off that debt. But this is a really simple way to figure out whether or not we should be paying off our debts immediately or keeping that money invested in the long run, looking at those interest rates. And this is also going to be on the worksheet that we'll be emailing out to you. But the other question that we get asked a lot is, when will you be relieved of your debt burden? How long do I have to make these payments until my debt is paid off? You can look at this by the debt that you have or your debt in total. So some numbers that you'll want to calculate, again, this is going to be on the worksheet and there is going to be a chart on the worksheet that will give you the answer to this, but you want to figure out those monthly debt payments, what your total current balance is of that debt, divide A by B, and you will get a number, and then you want to look at your interest rate. And then those two numbers on the chart will match up and show you how long it will take to pay off your debt. So I don't have that included here, but this is going to be another tool that we're going to pass out to you in that worksheet. So before we get to questions at the end here, again, I've talked a little bit about this as I've gone through these different slides here, but just some things to think about as we're wrapping up. We typically don't want to see you carry more than 2 credit cards if you find that when you're spending on your credit cards, you're having a hard time paying those off. So consolidation of your credit cards is a really good idea. Again, we want to make sure those credit cards aren't charging us annual fees and the interest, if you're going to carry a balance, is low. We want to keep tabs on our expenses. Hopefully you would get to a point where you don't need to have a monthly budget and you just kind of need to keep tabs on your spending over time, but a monthly budget will certainly keep you in track. And then again, I had you at the beginning, write down your debt from highest interest to lowest interest. You want to work at the top and work your way down when you think about paying off debt. Pay off that highest interest debt first, and then work your way down to the lower interest debt until you get to a point where you feel like you can invest your money versus paying off that debt. And then again, I had talked about this, but analyze those fixed and variable expenses as well. The worksheet's going to give you some tools for budgeting and some good detail on creating a budget for yourself and looking at those expenses, but breaking down those fixed and variables. All right, so we've hit about 20 minutes here. I want to make sure we have time for questions if we do have any. So again, if you have any questions, you want to email our info@sideswealth.com. It's going to be on the screen on the left-hand side here. Email info@sideswealth.com and we can kind of go through those questions. So, all right, it doesn't sound like we have any questions, so we can wrap this up. And close out for the day. So just wanted to thank you all for your time. If you do have any questions about your personal situation and you'd like to discuss this offline, you can email me directly. You can email anyone on our team directly. You can also email our group email and it'll get directed to us. So if you do have any questions offline, you would like to talk about your own personal situation, please feel free to email us. We're happy to help, and hope you can join these in the future. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time. You'll be getting an email with additional information from our presentation within the next couple of days. Thank you all so much.